Good evening, colleagues. Thank you for joining us today. And sincere apologies for what happened yesterday. We are hoping that your participation today will still be as it would have been yesterday. I'd like to welcome you to this presentation, in which we are going to tackle the issue of materials development in competence-based language teaching. I would also like to thank the teams that have been organizing the workshops across the provinces for the job well done so far. My presentation is structured in this way. Maybe before I go any further, are we able to hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. All right, so we are going to define materials and then discuss what role materials play in our teaching, and then why we need materials in our teaching, and sum up the role of materials into 5 purposes of materials, and then we'll look at the forms and kinds of materials. Then we'll conclude with the material development process. At the end of my presentation, there will be a time for people to make contributions and ask questions. For now, as usual, I'll ask you to keep your microphones muted as we go through this presentation. Okay. Now, one of the first presidents or national chairpersons of LATAS, Brian Tomlinson, has written extensively on materials. And in defining materials, we are going to quote a lot from him. Apologies for the siren behind. I'm doing this from my office at work. So, Brian Tomlinson has defined materials as anything used by teachers and learners to facilitate the learning of the language. Remember, we are defining materials here in the context of language teaching, not the overall or the general dictionary description or definition of materials. We are looking at it from the language teaching point of view. And so Brian Tomlinson identifies or defines materials as anything used by teachers and learners to facilitate the learning of a language. In this definition, he includes textbooks, videos, DVDs, emails, YouTube, dictionaries, grammar books, readers, workbooks, worksheets, newspapers, photos, food packages, audio recordings, flashcards, and so on, as a systematic description of techniques and activities that are used in the classroom. He also notes that the most important resource or resources in a classroom are the learners and the teachers. These are the most important resources. And advises that for any material, consider the sound material, it must be described and organized in such a manner that any teacher can use it without confusion and with minimal preparation time. Now, before we go further, I wish to state that As the curriculum development process continues, CDC, after they have done the syllabus validation, the next stage will be that of materials development. And I think they are going to organize the trainings here and there. The scope, I'm sure, will be announced by themselves, where they will engage the publishers and individuals as well as teachers in the training into materials development. Because we cannot implement a curriculum without materials. And so this is a key presentation to help prepare our minds in terms of the requirements that will come later. And also to give tips and create hunger and desire in all of us as teachers to participate in the materials development processes that are yet to come, so that we have little or no complaints about, no, these materials are substandard, these materials are bad, and so on. So we thought we should run through this materials development session so that people can have an idea of how to go about it, and then afterwards prepare it mentally, psychologically, and many other areas to participate in the coming programs that the government will undertake. Okay, that said, we move to the role of materials. So, in a classroom situation, materials are a resource for presentation of the subject content. So, we use the materials to present a lot of activities in form of passages, pictures, and sometimes. Okay. Then we also use materials as a source of activities for learners to practice communicative interaction. It is through the materials that we present that learners are able to interact with the teacher, with each other, and practice communication in the classroom. We also use the materials as a reference for learners in terms of grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation, and so on. We use materials for that purpose. The next is stimulation of ideas. So we use materials as a source of stimulation and a source of ideas for classroom activities. You play an audio, you show them a video clip, you show them a picture, and then from there a discussion is born, an activity is born, from which learners can write stories, can have a discussion, you can do description, can write some structure, and so on. Materials also work as support for less experienced teachers. That as teachers, materials come in handy when we are teaching. This is more pronounced amongst those that are not well experienced among us. Okay. We also use them to arouse learners' interests. As their interest is aroused, materials also help in making learners feel that they are having a properly planned class or a lesson. To support and guide both the learner and the teacher in terms of progression. When you study, you use, for example, this week you are considering, or your activities are based on Unit 1. Then next week you'll be Unit 2, the other week you'll be Unit 3, and so on. So this gives the learners some sense of progression that we are moving forward in our studies. They also provide a variety of texts. Materials are also a source of introduction and reinforcement in terms of areas of lexis or grammar. Okay. We use materials also to teach new skills and strategies that we really need. Materials also provide knowledge about other cultures. So learners will have knowledge as well as then which will enable them to appreciate other cultures. Materials are a springboard to stimulate learners to engage and to use the language. Engage with the language and use it as a structured and even open-ended situations. They guide learners in terms of other issues. Materials also, in doing so, need to be flexible so that other teachers can use them and also personalize them. Then materials also provide teachers with sound teaching principles, especially in the teacher's guides. That's where when you are writing materials, we provide a lot of guidance on methodology, steps to be taken in teaching a particular topic, and that helps a lot in terms of teaching, embedding teaching principles in the teachers. So all these can be summed into 5 main purposes of materials. The first one, to meet a psychological need, that is provide motivation and stimulation. The second one is exposure to the language, provide exposure to language. All these materials, both the teachers and other materials, they are a source of exposure, the language. Materials are also a vehicle that we use to carry information on grammar in the target language and other issues. We also provide the stimulus for other activities. So, apart from reading, a material can provide something that we can use to elicit written responses. We talked about the last one in the previous slide, where we talked about the TGs providing good model of practice for teachers. So materials can act as a teacher educator. Forms of materials. So we have the print form, the non-print form, and then the self-access. The print forms are the textbooks. They're the ones we use, the worksheets, the workbooks, the teacher's guides, the readers, newspapers, pictures, charts, and so on. These are the printed versions of materials. In the non-print form, materials include the audios, the videos, the digital images, the graphics, and the computer-based materials like tests and so on. Then we have self-access or internet materials. These ones which are never planned for, but we are things that we find via Google in terms of blogs, podcasts, and so on. These same materials are grouped into 2 kinds. We have the authentic ones and we have the artificial ones. The authentic ones are those that have not been built or that have not been developed for the purposes of teaching, like newspapers. They are written for news, for the public to read news. TV programs, they are produced for different purposes, and but we do use them as materials for teaching. And so when we do, they become materials, teaching materials. So these are referred to as authentic materials. They reflect the real world as the language is used. Then the artificial ones are the ones that we design specifically for teaching purposes, like the the textbooks that we use. So those are developed specifically for teaching purposes. And when that, no wonder they are called artificial or non-authentic materials. So some of the authentic materials are given on in the lists on your screen there. The novels, short stories, poems, long song lyrics. These are created independently for different purposes, for entertainment. The newspapers and magazine articles, these are written for their own purposes, but we use them as the samples in our lessons. And the rest of the stories, the rest of the list continues. Okay, so what are the advantages of these kinds of materials? Authentic ones, they provide the realistic practice for learners. They also are closely to the learner's needs. They are close to the learner's needs, especially for competence-based language teaching. We are talking about the use of language, the teaching of language as it should be used authentically in society. And so those authentic materials will play a critical role in making sure that the learners are able to relate closely what they learn in class with what actually happens in real life. Okay, they offer models of real language use. Okay, they link the classroom to the outside world and then provide authentic cultural information about the target culture or target language. Then the artificial ones are more comprehensive. They are tailored to the specific level and then tailored to specific pedagogical purposes. So when we say tailored to a specific level, when they write newspapers, there is no specific grade they are writing for. Okay, those stories in newspapers are for mostly the general public to consume. So it means it gives you a harder time as a teacher to do selection of which articles are suitable for your level, for the pupils that you want to teach. So that is one of the advantages of the unauthentic ones. They are developed specifically for a purpose. And then they are tailored for, so if you are teaching summary, you are teaching reading. If you are teaching reading, for example, reading for speed, you have a particular pedagogical approach you want to teach reading. Meanwhile, the unauthentic ones, the length of the articles is different. Disadvantages, the authentic materials may be too difficult or may be difficult for the learners to, comprehend. And then, as a result, they may frustrate the learners and make them lose confidence. If they read so much from newspapers, from whatever, and they feel the language that is being used is too advanced for them, there is a likelihood, there's a potential that it may prove quite disastrous on their part, and then they lose confidence in their use of the language. But for the artificial materials, the language used may not be authentic because they are tailored for teaching purposes. So when you use them, they might be, provide artificial language tailored. The dialogues that we find in books is not the naturally occurring dialogue, but it's something that has been altered in order to provide sort of communication that is seamless and no pauses and so on. Learners also may feel unrealistically confident because of the artificial language that is there. It may provide them artificial confidence as well. Okay, we have done what materials are, what the forms of materials, what we need materials for, and the purposes and also the types. Now we move to the materials development process. We move to materials development process. Among us, amongst the teachers, we have people that have developed materials in form of course books or supplementary materials and so on. I think most of you have used the Chief Lazarus, the composition and summary book, the green one, and some of you may have used the Mr. What's his man's name? Sorry, the one who wrote something on literature, the course book, Mr. Mbewe, Ian Mbewe, right? And I think Monica Imasiko has also written something. So I hope one of them or two of them are in this meeting so that they can provide insight. I'll try to run through what I have found through research about materials development process. Okay, so here we are going to look at the definition of materials development, some principles of materials development, some things that we need to consider, some factors we consider when choosing, adapting, or developing materials. And then we look at the 3 possible ways to develop materials. Okay, so I'll take you back to Brian Tomlinson. His definition of material development, he puts it in 2 categories. We can either define it as a field of study or as a practical undertaking. So as a field of study, materials development involves, the studying of the principles and procedures of designing, implementing, and evaluating language teaching materials. So all the nitty-gritties, the principles, how to design, the procedures, where do you start from, and so on. As a field of study, you can study this probably at master's or PhD level. And then as a practical undertaking, materials development refers to anything which is done by writers, teachers, or learners to provide sources of language input, to exploit those sources in ways that maximize the likelihood of intake and to stimulate purposeful output. What do we mean by that? So materials development entails creating, choosing, as well as adapting and organizing materials and activities so that learners can achieve their objectives that will help them reach the goals of the course or the curriculum. It encompasses decisions about the actual materials you use, as well as the activities learners do, and how these materials and activities are organized into lessons. Okay, what are some of the principles? There are many of them. I picked about 15, or 14 of them, so I'll quickly run through them. The first one, when we are developing materials, we must make sure that they are prepared in such a way or developed in such a manner that they should achieve noticeable impact on the learners in terms of when you talk about novelty, how unusual or usual the topics that we have chosen are, the kind of illustrations and activities, the variety, how we break monotony, from one unit to the next. How do we break? Learners don't do the same thing so that it becomes a routine. So we break routine. And then they must be attractive presentation. Yeah, it's quite costly, but making sure that the colors that we use and the spaces and photographs are attractive to that level of learners. The primary schoolers, the preschool children have different things that excite them or attract them to any materials than those that are in Form 1 or in Form 4 or Grade 2. So each level you provide what is attractive for them. They must have appealing content in terms of topics. What topics are interesting to the learners at that particular level, the primary schoolers. So you make sure that these areas of impact are achieved. There also must be achievable challenge. Each material must provide a challenge to the learners so that their minds, their thinking is challenged. Enable them to think, analyze, and recreate. Okay. The second one is you should help your learners feel at ease. Okay. The spaces that we live in materials, for example, must be one that should not learners panic. But no, we have to cover all this, and then we put so much context in it. Using culturally reliable texts, we talk about these things and illustrations that learners are familiar with. Okay. If you write something that materials that have snow, so much snow, meanwhile, most learners have never seen snow in this country. So you try to put something that is culturally relatable to the learners. Ensure that materials are meant for learners to learn and not to be tested. So in the materials, you put more of learning activities instead of testing activities. That is number 3. They must help learners develop confidence. Simple language tasks for learners to complete successfully so that you are building on their confidence. And then you move, of course, from known to unknown instead of starting with complex stuff. And then when you want to go simple, learners are already discouraged. Okay. The fourth one, the materials, the content in them must be perceived by the learners to be relevant and useful. Okay. So make sure you refer to the curriculum as to the purpose of that particular subject area. Why should learners learn that particular subject area? And so this will provide you with the information on whether the materials are responding to they are useful enough in terms of what should be used. Okay. And then for competence-based materials, make sure you provide learners with experiences similar to real-life tasks. Okay, then number 5, materials should require and facilitate learner self-investment. Learners should be autonomous. You must cultivate interest in such a way that learners will be able to invest time and their own resources in learning the language. They must also be in such a way that learners are ready to acquire the points that are being taught. Further, materials should expose the learners to the language in an authentic use. We have talked about this, I think, in the previous slides. And learners' attention should be drawn to the linguistic features of the input. So you make sure that every material that you provide, the linguistic features are brought out so that learners should learn the rules and the usage of language. Provide the opportunities to use the target language to achieve communicative purposes. This one is more pronounced in competence-based language because ultimately the approach is meant to, develop communicative competences in the learner. Okay. They must also take into account that the positive effects of instruction are usually delayed. Materials must be in such a way that you know that developing competencies in the learner takes time. It's not an event, but a process. So let's develop the materials that will respond to that same principle, that learners will need time to develop. So skills are developed over time, not in an event. Okay. Take into account that learners have different learning styles. Okay, there are those that are visual, use their eyes a lot, those that learn better when they hear from others, from the teacher, those that learn by doing, those that learn by artistic work, those that like experiments, always wanting to do something to show and test. Those that are analytic, those that are global, independent, are those that are dependent. These learning styles. Okay. Then also take note of the difference in affective attitudes. The learner's response to emotional stimuli through texts. Okay, the genre, the activities, the methodology, all these should take into account, they should take into account the different reactions learners have towards the emotional stimuli. Materials also should take into account, okay, they have attitudes. I think I've talked about this already. Then also bear in mind that materials must conform to certain methods and contexts. If you are teaching, you are preparing materials in English, which English? We must be familiar as teachers with the concept of global Englishes. So, like the one by Katru, which has a cycle of world Englishes. It has the inner circle, which includes these English-speaking countries, like Australia, UK, New Zealand, Canada, USA. And then we have the outer circle, which has the former colonies of the British Empire. Those are known as the outer circle. They adopted English from independence and they are using it still. And then we have the expanding circle, these that have learned English over time in order to provide for commercial reasons. And then we have which culture are the learners supposed to learn? Is it our Zambian culture? So you refer to the curriculum for these issues of cultural. The methods, in some cases, I think in most cases, will be provided for in the syllabus. You refer to the syllabus for the methods that are there. Okay. So now there's a process that we use, or that should be used in terms of developing materials. The first part is to do with determining and organizing the principles. Okay, so which principles are you, in terms of themes, in terms of genres, in terms of tasks, do you want or do you wish to develop in the learners that are going to use the materials? Again, here you refer to the curriculum and to the syllabus, which are the thematic areas, the genres, and the tasks that have been there defined. And then after you have determined these and you have organized them, you also now identify the units based on the principles you have outlined in the first task. Then from there, you sequence those units. How, in which order do you want them to appear? Which unit should be first, based on the thematic areas you have organized in the first task there? Which one should come next, and so on, their chronological arrangement, the sequencing. Then you determine the unit content. How, in each unit, which content should come, and how will this content be arranged? And then you organize now the unit. So in each unit, after you have added the content, you go through it again. Is this order of the unit okay? You go back to sequencing. What should we start with? Should we start with listening and speaking? Should we start with comprehension? Should we start with the structure? Should we start with a quiz? Should we start with a dialogue? Whichever unit that you want to. So the process just goes around like that. And then you come up with your materials. Okay. Now, what are some of the factors you need to consider when developing materials? Number one, consider the learners and their needs. Again, you go back to the curriculum. What kind of a learner does the country want to develop, to produce at the end of school? And what does this learner need in order to develop into that human being the nation wants the school system to mold him or her? So you look at that factor. Next, the goals and objectives of the curriculum. What are the goals of the curriculum? What does it intend to achieve? What does it intend to? So you look at, if you go to the overview of the curriculum framework 2023, it will actually provide you with information about what the nation wants to achieve through education. So those goals and objectives, they are very important in your consideration. Okay, how learners learn and how the learners and teachers' roles are in class. In the, I think, previous slides, when I was talking about materials bearing in mind the learning styles of learners, okay, it comes again here as one of the considerations. And then on top of that, I think if you remember the presentation we did on the principles of competence-based language teaching and its application in the so you will discover that we talked about the roles of teachers. We talked about the roles of teachers in a competence-based classroom. What role does the teacher play, and what role does the learner play? These are very important considerations. Okay, and then the aspects of language learners need to learn. So every level, at each level, for example, the preschoolers, they have certain aspects of language that they need to be taught. You can't just lump the whole language on them. They have to gradually move from one aspect to the next. And as they go into primary, we advance a bit. We add more aspects of language. And then as they go to secondary, we add more. As they go to university or college, we add more. So that is a consideration. The types of activities. What activities should the learners be engaged in, are going to be engaged in? Is it rhyming? Is it writing? Is it just speaking? Is it reading? And so on. Okay, when deciding activities, you have these considerations. They are relevant to learners' experience and knowledge. They are relevant to learners outside of the classroom. So every activity you include in your materials. What impact, what relevance does it have on the child's life outside the classroom? all those considerations should come into our minds. Then, how these activities are going to build the confidence of the learners in using the language within and outside the classroom. Okay? And then, to what extent do these activities allow learners to solve problems, to discover the problems, analyze the problems, and provide solutions within the classroom and also in society? Remember, one of the key competencies in the new curriculum is problem solving. A learner should be able to identify or discover problems in society, analyze these problems, and then offer solutions to the country. That's easy. So even our materials should have that particular component and the in terms of activities. Okay, then activities should help the learners develop specific skills and strategies, such as critical thinking. We go back to Bloom's taxonomy and the new curriculum. You discover these concepts are quite often used. Okay, activities must develop specific language skills. Again, and the need for authentic communication. Make sure they integrate the skills, the four main skills of language: speaking, listening, reading, and writing. I think we talked about this also when we are looking at the principles of competence-based language teaching. Our activities should enable our learners to understand the structure of a text. Okay, the structure of a text: introduction, the paragraphing, the cohesion, and what each structure brings out as meaning. Okay, cultural context in which the language has been used, and also the differences in cultures. So we must have activities that provide this context of cultures and also how these differ from one culture, one to another. Development of social awareness. Learners should be able, through these activities, understand the social structure of our country, the continent, and the world, and how we differ from each other in terms of ethnicity, political affiliation, religion, and how all these differences how diversity must be used to complement our coexistence. And also how to relate with other people, how to understand the rantings of other people and how to deal with those, how not to retaliate, how to avoid physical fights, all those things. Activities should also be as authentic as possible. Okay. Further, activities should vary in terms of roles. Not Mtinta today was playing nurse in our lesson, or in our dialogue, in our role play. Again, next week, Mtinta will play nurse again. Those of us that teach literature, if you are teaching imprisonment of Batar, if this one is playing Shango today, even in the next week, Shango. No, we try to, in these activities, we try to vary the roles and the groupings of these learners so that we do not provoke stereotyping among the learners. Activities also should be of the various types and the purposes, of course. Authentic texts must be reliable and possible. We talked about this. Employ a variety of materials. Don't use the same things over and over. When making choices for materials, we look at the authenticity, and then it will determine the pedagogical approach. And then when it comes to tasks and activities, we look at the real world, and then how which pedagogy are we going to use, the method are we going to use in order to produce that real world like experience in the activity, language output. How, from the control, how are the learners able to move from the controlled classroom activity level to an open-ended situation outside the classroom? Okay. Ways of developing materials. So we have 3 ways. Evaluation, which involves selection of existing materials. Which ones do you want to use? And then we have writing or materials design. And then we have materials adaptation. That is adapting materials that are existing. So let's start with route one, evaluation. So evaluation is simply matching, okay? The matching process. So they are available materials. Most of us have different textbooks in our departments. Of course, depending on the financial muscles of our institutions, you have progress in English. Some of you have Excel and something. What do they call that book? Excel and Advanced. Okay, we have Achievers. We have the yellow books from Old, and then we have the MK. So we have these variety of materials, and then you find which one of these materials is suitable for the lesson I'm going to teach today. If I'm going to teach summary, which one has the best summary passages? If I'm going to teach a particular structure, which one has better examples or better rule explanation? So this process of matching your activities and the kind of materials you need to find a solution, then it is called material evaluation. Okay, so we are selecting from. So how do we do this? We choose a task that we want to use the materials for, and then we describe how we want it, of course, in our lesson planning and so on. The procedures, the inputs, the language activities and outcomes, and then we plan and evaluate. And then how we want to evaluate the lesson. Then afterwards, we use the materials. And then when we're using these materials, we collect information on how easy the learners found the tasks, how easy, even as a teacher, do we find the material to use, and what judgments, what conclusions were we able to make after observing the learners do certain activities, and then come up with your own report of how good or how terrible the material was. Then we can also use scanning with this model, which provides that we can evaluate materials from these perspectives. Number one, language content. In terms of level, in terms of authenticity, in terms of correctness of the language. I'm sure there are people that were saying, no, there's a certain type of book that was introduced together with the current syllabus, which had a lot of mistakes. So you look for such things, language content. How correct is the language in terms of use, grammar, and even the construction of sentences, and so all those things. And then selection and grading of language items. So you select and grade the language items. Are they level appropriate? Are they correctly used? And so on. You also look at the presentation and practice of these language items. How are they presented? Do they move nicely from introduction to explanation to examples and activities and so on? Then the developing of language and communication ability. To what extent does this material help in developing language skills? That is the speaking, the reading, the listening, and the writing. And then communicative abilities. How good are the materials in terms of providing these? And then the supporting materials. How, to what extent do these materials motivate the learners to learn the language? So for curriculum, we look at one, material should correspond to the needs of the learner at that particular level. Now, these are provided for in the curriculum. You match them against the curriculum needs, and then reflect on the uses. Are these materials useful now, or how useful will they be in the future? And then, especially the future of the learners. Do they facilitate learners' learning progress? Okay, without imposing a method which is quite rigid. And then the mediation between the target language and the learners. How do these materials come into play? We move to the other one, which is Hutchinson and Waters model. Here, you'd start by defining the criteria. So how are you going to tell whether these materials are suitable or not? So you form the criteria. If you want, you can use the Cummings-Worth is one, which is language content, language activities, and those others that we've discussed in the earlier slide. And then to come up with these, you can use either the subjective analysis or the objective analysis. So you look at your own classroom and the course that you want to teach, and the curriculum, of course, in terms of material requirements. What type of materials are required? Do you need to use audios? Do you need to use textbooks? Does the topic that you want to cover require the use of textbooks? Or what materials do you need? So you have your own assessment. If you want to teach poetry, do you need a book for that? Or do you need this audio poems from someone and so on? So you do your own subjective analysis. Okay, and then, or you can use the objective analysis method. And then when you have done so, you make sure now, that you match your own analysis, the subjective and the objective, and then you match them now. How far does the material match the needs of the learners? Your own needs are the teacher to deliver that particular lesson. So you do that evaluation. So you evaluate the materials based on the audience, the kind of learners you want to use them on, the aims found in the curriculum and the syllabus, also found in the curriculum and the syllabus, as well as the methodology which has been proposed. Okay, so the following slides is are just expanding more on that. When we talk about the audience, your subjective analysis is who are your learners, because those are at the center of your interests as a teacher. And then objectives, who is the material intended for? So you look at this material I want to use, whom was it intended for? There are times when we have books that were intended for a particular audience. We have books in our libraries that were intended for an American audience, for example. And then we want to adapt them to use them to teach a particular unit. So we ask these questions. Who are my learners? And then who were these materials intended for? Then you look at the aims. So what are the aims of the syllabus and the curriculum for this particular level or grade? And then what are the aims of the material? So you do those, the objective and subjective. So subjective looks at your own context, and then the objective look at what the materials are meant to achieve, both in terms of audience, MC, and content. And then So when it comes to content, what text types should be included according to your syllabus? And then what kinds of texts are there in the materials you have received, and so on. How should the content be used? Now, this may apply even to the pamphlets that we buy from the streets. You look at what is suitable for your learners and what was meant for in that particular. In terms of methodology, so what kind of exercises are needed for the learners to learn this particular topic that I want to teach? And then you also look at what kind of exercises are included in the materials you have. Learning techniques, teaching and learning techniques, what you have planned for, or what are the syllabus dictates for you to use, and what are used in the material, and so on. The guidance and support for teaching, and then the materials provided. Okay, so you have all these questions from your subjective side and from the objective side. After you have answered all these questions from each column, if they'll be able to answer your questions and help you identify the requirements. So this will be the basis for you to write your own materials, or to decide whether to use those materials or not. Then analyze the materials you have selected, answering all the subjective questions, compare the findings, and then you make your choice. The next part is the materials design. Now, this one is the one that I am hoping will develop an interest in. This is the designing materials, writing materials from scratch. Okay, so why do we write materials in the first place? There are three main reasons. Number one, it's possible that we may observe that the materials that are fit for this specific subject area for these particular learners are not available on the market. And I think that's what prompted people like Monica and Mr. Mbewe to write books, course books for literature in English for grade 10, because we didn't have such materials on the market. And then the second one is, even when they are available, there might be some restrictions, okay? There might be some restrictions in terms of currency or import. If they are available on the market, there may be restrictions such as price. They may be too expensive, and also they may be limited in coverage of certain areas, okay? And I think the limitations in the materials we have in terms of explanations and examples for composition, I may assume may have prompted Chief Lazaro to write that book that we use, the green one. And then sometimes we may write materials for non-educational reasons. For example, enhancing reputation. Platters, if we want to enhance our reputation, this is where the challenge comes in, that our editorial teams at all levels, you write materials in the name of the association that may enhance our reputation, that we mean business in this language teaching field. I think we have done something with the primary sector, the primary seed. Those materials very soon, probably CTC will allow them to be used. And once they authorize, you will see the LATA's logo on those materials. So enhancing individual or institutional reputation. Now, For us to write our materials, we must first of all look at our defining objectives. What are the materials supposed to do? Firstly, they must provide the stimulus. We've talked about this, okay? Contain, in order for them to be really stimulating, they must contain interesting texts, enjoyable activities, opportunities for learners to develop their own knowledge and skills, and also a content which both learners can use and cope with. Also, materials must help to organize the teaching and learning process through various activities, okay? Be clear, systematic, flexible, and allow for creativity. Again, Bloom's taxonomy that the new curriculum focuses on ends on creativity as the highest order of the taxonomy. They must reflect the author's view on the nature of language and learning processes, also reflect the nature of the learning task. And also, as we develop objectives, materials must help broaden the basis of teacher training by introducing teachers to new techniques. When you are writing materials, try to, of course, as you cover the conventional methodology which is there, try to cover in, also bring in something new that the teachers may find very interesting. Provide models of correct and appropriate language use. This is very critical. You can't write materials in English language or Zambian language which have errors in terms of language use. This is usually very embarrassing and may ruin your reputation. This model, materials design, only takes 2 or 4 steps: input, content, language, and task. So when using this model, in terms of input, we look at the texts, dialogues, video recordings, diagrams, those materials, those parts, the components, and pieces of communication or data which provide the stimulus, and new language items, correct models of language use, a topic of communication, opportunities for learners to use their existing skills, and so on. So these are the areas that help us see. They are called input, things that stimulate the learners to begin communicating. Under content focus, we look at meaningful communication in the classroom, which must generate language as a means of conveying information and feelings. The material at content level, we must provide content which is meaningful in terms of communication. And then language input, of course, the materials must involve not only communication activities, but also knowledge of language itself. So that means the rules, not knowing only how to communicate, say something or write something, but they must also be in compliance with the rules. The tasks that we provide in materials should lead towards communication, and the learners also must have content of the language they learned. This is just an expansion. So as a starter, you provide the input and then you add content. In the content that you have added, make sure the language is correct. And you find additional input there in terms of language rules and so on. And then we also make sure that the content reflects or provides an ability for learners to use their own language abilities. And then the task is for the learners now to produce the language and content they have learned. So using this model, in stage 1, find your text based on 3 criteria: naturally occurring piece of communication. This is important. The communication that we use in dialogues, the dialogues you see in these books that we use, is not naturally occurring. Most of it has been doctored, it has no pauses. So for naturally occurring pieces of communication, you can record people discussing, of course with their consent, something, and then you bring it as a piece of, you can transcribe it and use it for teaching in class. Okay? It must be suitable for learners' needs and interests. Of course, we have referred to the syllabus and the curriculum. It also must be capable of generating useful classroom activities. And then you go to the end of the model. Think of the tasks or a task the learner could do at the end of the unit in terms of classroom activities. Go back to the syllabus and check how these are able to achieve the aims of the syllabus. Decide which language structures you are supposed to teach in terms of vocabulary, functions, content. Is it tense? Is it agreement? Is it parts of speech? Which language structures are you including in this particular, or that you want to be teaching points in this particular text?
Joy.
Then think of some. Oh, sorry. Sorry about that. Okay, then think of in stage 5, exercises and activities that will help the learners practice items of grammar, structures you have talked about. Then you go back to the input again. If there are any revision tasks that can be given to the learners, you go through 1 to 6 again with the revised input. So you keep on changing like that from unit to unit. Then check new materials against syllabus again and amend accordingly. Whenever you bring in a new text or a new material, you make sure you check it against the syllabus. Then you try the material in your class first. If you need to obtain authority from the school, also you can do that, and then ask so that you are able to try them in your classroom. And then after you have tried them, revise. See what was wrong with them, and then revise us accordingly. When you're sequencing, always move from simpler to complex, from controlled to more open-ended, from providing knowledge or skills to requiring using them. This is where competency-based comes in. We are not only teaching learners for them to know the language, but to use it appropriately in real-life situations. Then also, you start from receptive skills before you go to productive skills of language. So those 4 skills, listening and reading, are receptive. So you use those, you focus on those before learners can learn how to speak and write productive ones. Okay, use productive skills to activate knowledge, and also the receptive ones to consolidate the knowledge. Okay, this is also on sequencing. So the hints when designing materials. Number 1, it is always easier to compare first the existing materials. Like they say, it's easier, I think I saw a rewrite somewhere, it's easier to adapt current materials than to start new ones, new ideas. To adapt an existing idea than to start a new one. But if you're able to start a new one, even better. Okay? work in teams. It's usually better. And I think that's one thing that we are not very good at as Zambians, working in teams. We are so much into individualism. We like doing things on our own. So teamwork may produce better. If you look at those yellow books, I think most of them were written by 5 or 6 people. But maybe those are the ones that were developing the content. There are others that may have done other works. Do not underestimate the time that is required for you to write materials. It's not an event, it's a long process. And then pay careful attention to the appearance of your materials. I'm sure those who have developed materials will give us more insight on this one. The last component is adaptation. So this one, there's a difference between evaluation and adaptation. Evaluation of materials involves just selecting which materials from the existing that you want to use. Adaptation is about changing the materials that you have in order to suit your context. So it helps us to provide solutions to these types of teachers, 1, 2, and 3, where 1 doesn't use textbooks, where the number 2 can't teach without textbooks, whereas number 3, well, may find it useful, sometimes not useful. So adapting textbooks or materials is about just providing the teachers some sort of new ways of teaching particular areas. So here we are going to look at advantages and disadvantages of adaptation, how to adapt materials, and then some choices we need to make, and also some suggestions. Advantages of using a textbook. First, a well-written textbook provides a syllabus for the course. CDC requires that if you are writing a course book, remember we have course books and supplementary materials. So for a book to qualify to be a course book, it must cover all the competencies or all the outcomes. For the current syllabus, it must cover all the outcomes from the start of the outcomes to the next. So if it's under grade 10, you're writing a grade 10 course book, it must cover all the outcomes from in composition, listening and speaking, comprehension, and all the structures. That one, so if it's a well-written course book, it will actually act as a syllabus. You can use it as if it's a syllabus. It provides a roadmap of the course to the learners. So it helps the learners know that they are advancing from one level to the next. Provides also the teacher saving time. You just go to the textbook, which is already a syllabus in some way. It helps you to teach with less hassle. Okay. It also is for assessing. Remember, learners are assessed based on the syllabus that we teach, the teaching syllabus. And so if a textbook is properly written in such a way that it covers the whole syllabus, it also provides you the basis for assessment. It also provides supporting materials and consistency. Well, disadvantages of 10 depending on a syllabus or on a textbook may be many, okay? Sometimes the content may be relevant to the learner's needs. Some books have been found to contain irrelevant material, okay? May not be right at that level sometimes. There may be too much focus on one aspect of the language. Sometimes authors of materials may be focusing so much on things that they are very comfortable and leave out the uncomfortable yet important aspects of the language. Okay, may not have the right mix of activities, may be monotonous, and then may have a lockstep in terms of sequencing. And then the visuals, the readings may be boring for the learners, may go out of date. Yeah, course books go out of date. The yellow books, though we love them so much, in some areas they have been outdated. Even the current ones we are using, as we transition to competence-based, some of them will become irrelevant or out of date. Okay, and then the timetable for completing this may be very unrealistic. How do we adapt a textbook? You get inside it, investigate how it was put together, and then understand the hidden curriculum in the textbooks, and then consider other factors. Okay, how do we investigate how it was put together? You ask these questions. How have the authors conceptualized the content? How is the material organized? And on what basis were the units sequenced? What is the content of each unit? What are the objectives of the unit? And then how does each unit's content help to achieve the objectives of the syllabus or its own objectives? Understanding the hidden curriculum. A hidden curriculum, we need to identify, first of all, to define what it is, and then why you need to be aware of it, and how to check for the hidden curriculum. So the first one is, what is the hidden curriculum? These are the underlying messages that go beyond the information that is provided for in the course content. Things to do with the gender, the sex, they call it sexism. Okay, you provide examples that are, maybe Johnny was driving the car all the time. The boys are either driving, are building, they are creating certain things. Meanwhile, the girls are sweeping, or the girls are cooking, the girls are spreading the bed, and so on. The girls are looking after babies. All those, the underlying messages you are communicating in your material is that there are certain jobs that are only meant for boys, and materials that the works or jobs that are meant for the girls or the females. And so you have to be aware of this hidden curriculum as you create materials. Things to do with religion, political beliefs, attitudes towards certain kinds of people, nationalities, or culture. Okay. So why do you need to be aware of this? It is good for your own integrity as a teacher to know the hidden curriculum, so that you are not said to be discriminatory in your teaching and in your presentation of materials. Also, because learners identify themselves with certain groups of people, and if they feel discriminated against, their learning may not be enjoyable, and you may have destroyed their prospective future. How to check? Make sure you go to sex. I was talking about gender sensitive language. Make sure that the language you use in your materials is balanced in terms of gender. You don't, and also how you portray the females and the males. There is equality, there is sensitivity there. Social orientation, how you portray, you don't, even if you are Tonga, you don't use only names, Tonga names as the example in your examples and activities, but be balanced. Use Kaonde names, use Lozi names, use Bemba names, and so on. Be sensitive to these. When you are giving examples or passages on religion. Don't be too biased toward the Christianity alone. Just know that these materials will be used by learners who are Buddhists, who are Islam, and so on. Politics don't always focus on the party that is ruling at the moment. If you are raising a topic that deals with politics, make sure you are balanced. The introduction or the involvement or the inclusion of national values, make sure those things of accountability, integrity, and so on, they are properly catered for. Things that are given in your context. What things are we allowed to use, say? What things may not be acceptable in our context? Beliefs, understandings, how people learn languages, and so on. Children's interest. Okay, the choices we need to make when we are adapting a textbook. You can adapt it at an activity level. You change or supplement or eliminate certain activities because they are not suitable for the curriculum or they are not speaking to the demands of the curriculum. You can also make changes at unit level in terms of the order, the types of activities, and so on. At syllabus level, so you look at how compliant, since the syllabus has been changed and our syllabus dictates the kind of material. So you look at, you compare it, you eliminate parts of the textbook that have no bearing to the kind of syllabus you are using. Okay, now we come to the conclusion. Like I said at the beginning, this is a very important topic. I know I have rushed through it somehow, but it's very important. The idea was to spark a desire in by providing a few hints here and there, because as teachers, we need to take keen interest in, the development of materials. We need to explore materials development even further at individual level and at group level, at school level, and as LATAs, our editors at every level, district, province, as well as national level. We need, this is one area we have failed to operate very well as Language Teachers Association of Zambia. We need to venture into materials production. The pamphlets that our children are subjected to, they buy from the streets. People who are producing those things for commercial reasons, they have destroyed and distorted in the manner that languages have been taught through those things. So let's take keen interest so that we produce quality of materials. And then we'll stop complaining about the poor quality. We can choose the evaluation method, the design method, or the adaptation method. And then we develop our own materials. Thank you for your attention. And now we can go into questions as well as comments. Thank you so much. Let me see who is here to moderate. I can't see Mr. Oh, Mr. Mono is here. Mr. Mono, and question and answer part. Thank you so much.
Okay, so those with questions can just raise their hand. Once we see the hand, we'll be able to give you the platform to ask the question or make your contribution.
Please take note of the questions. Give me 1 minute. I Just take note of the two questions. I'll be back shortly. But if they are just comments, they can just go ahead.
Okay, so we'll start with Mr. I don't know whether it's Mr. Study Bernard, followed by Madam Loda Kombe. In that order, if there are questions or comments, you can go ahead.
Thank you. Good evening, colleagues. And, I wish to thank the President for the presentation. Mine is just to do with comments. We really need to pay attention to materials development. I think we are presented with a number of course books that have a lot of inadequacies in terms of content. Some of these materials are not in line with the syllabus. It is actually hard for teachers to use these materials. You discover that you are teaching in this direction, the exam comes from this other angle. So a lot of issues, especially if teachers don't go through the syllabuses. I think as latas, I don't know whether it is very possible to really do justice in terms of coming up with very perfect material or perfect materials. I don't know how possible this is. We have this special interest group, I think, in charge of this. I am one of the authors on the letters for. I think some people could have used those who were there in Mansa, the pocketed sentence transformations, just trying to simplify things for teachers, golden rules in English language, quite a number of people that have been mentioned. I think we can come together and come up with something that is very, very powerful, that can stand the test of time, especially that the new curriculum is on the way. Thank you very much for this wonderful presentation.
For that comment, we can move on to
I'm back. Has Mr. Study spoken?
Yes, he has. He presented his comment to saying we've been presented with materials that are quite inadequate. So as we need to see to it that we ensure that quality materials are provided for our teachers and our learners so that we have something. And then as an in the delivery uniform for the teachers. So the next person to either ask a question or comment is Madam Kobe. So that she can unmute herself and go ahead with either the question or comment.
All right. Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I just wanted to thank the presenter today. Mine is just to thank him for this good presentation because it's actually it has actually instilled this interest so that we begin the journey. Last part of us crying for poor production of these materials. Why can't we take the lead in producing good materials? So personally, how I wish everyone was here to listen to this beautiful presentation so that we can come together as LATAs as we are going into next year and actually introducing these new things in the curriculum so that we begin to produce good materials which are excellent and good for the learners. That was my submission. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, Madam Combe, for that comment. Any other comments or questions by way of raising your hand and giving the floor to ask? Or better still, if you can't raise your hand, the chat box is there. You can see Mr. President, it seems there are no more questions or comments. I've just seen one pop up in the chat box. Let me read it. Madam Sylvia Monsari says just a concern, some literature books bought in schools. It will help us if we took time to go through the reprints. There's Animal Farm and The Old Man and the Meadow. I feel we should have control of the suppliers. There are a lot of errors in these novels, making it difficult for learners to follow. I encourage each and every teacher of language to go through these materials, lest we feed the learners with wrong information. Okay, it's a concern, yes. You are noted. I think this is why the topic has come for us to begin to take the lead in material production.
Okay, so indeed, Sylvia, it's private publishers. Mostly they are in it for the money. There are certain versions of printed by different companies of these same popular books we are using, like Animal Farm, The Old Man and the Meadow. You find there are various versions. So each publisher, you should look at the publisher themselves, especially the printing companies. If they have a book, others, so when we are buying, that when you are buying, if you look at them, where you have a chance, go through are paid for by the school. It's very important that we do so that we don't get poor quality. Baroda, let me throw a challenge to the editorial committees. From the National Executive Committee, we have editors. Mr. Mono is one of them. He's the editor for English. And then we have, I think, every Zambian language and French. If we cannot be doing, if we can't produce newsletters or magazines, I want to see ideas for massive materials development from each subject area. Literature in English, English language, for Form 1, for Form whatever. As we go next year, the nation will need materials for Form 1. Once the syllabus is validated, let's read through the syllabus. I'm sure we are going to have a presentation on syllabus interpretation in terms of materials development. I'm sure CDC is going to call for a certain orientation. Let's take interest and form small committees. Small committees. We have, for example, English from the provinces. And then Mr. Mono makes the 11. Can't we, as a small committee of 11 people, come up with a scope and sequence? And then we try to develop content within those materials. Call for contributions from other people within the association. I'm sure a textbook produced by Latas should be of higher quality because we have learners' interest and our own interest as teachers rather than money to produce it. Otherwise, it's something that we really should think about and work towards developing. I can see Monica. It's good you are in attendance. You are one of those that noticed the gap and produced a book for Literature 10. And I'm sure people can have insights from you as we work on new materials for the new syllabus. I had seen Chief Lazar at some point. Oh, he's there. Okay. Mr. Stan, are you still
Yes, sir. Just I
teaching?
think a quick one, yes, sir. Just on the point you have hinted on, I think we really need the roadmap so that by the time the syllabus is validated, we really, just like I've indicated, we really need to come up with a material. I don't think we can afford to continue relying on these materials that are not helping us. Just like you have indicated, as Latas, I think our material could be of high quality. It will be above board because we understand the classroom situation. We know our weaknesses in terms of methodologies. We know the interests of the learners. So I think the SIG for materials development should just right away, I think, get on board. We are there, lot of writers, teachers all over the country. We can make a very big difference. I tell my colleagues in Kafue district, we need materials as Latas, and we are capable of doing that. Thank you.
Just a comment, Mr. President.
Yes, please.
I think I wish to agree with Mr. Study's comment. The SIG on materials production, together with the editorial team from the provinces, we can come up with a textbook for writers. I wish to believe that between now and the December syllabus, start to read simply is between now and then. The work needs to begin now. So I think we'll put up something to the SIG materials production. So
Okay, Mr. Mono, thank you so much. So I think we'll put this to the special interest group on materials development. Although its coordinator is currently held up with his school, but I think we'll work out something and probably bring someone to temporarily lead it, probably from the current coordinators or someone who is just a member in there, so that we come up with a roadmap. Let's work on a roadmap. Yesterday, it's just after I was cut, I said, look, coming up with ideas, we should not defeat our ideas because we don't have money. Great ideas always find the funding. When you come up with an idea, when we do proper research, when we come up with something that is a product of concerted effort and a brilliant idea in terms of materials development, there will always be someone or some people or some organizations that will come on board to fund in terms of printing those materials. I'll give an example that these webinars we are having and the workshops are sponsored by the British Council. They did not come to us looking with their money, hanging money around and saying, we are looking for anything that we want to give money for. We had to come up with an idea and sold it to them, and they found it feasible and plausible for them to sponsor. So we need a roadmap. Mr. Mono and team, together with the SIG, I think we'll chat on the sidelines that we have to start. We make a roadmap in terms of how we want materials, because we don't have so much time, but we have to start working. The validation team, what I know is the validation of the syllabus will be done somewhere in December, next month. So, yet in January, we need to implement the new curriculum. So materials are a matter of urgency. I agree with the Chief Lazaro and Mr. Stali and others that have echoed the same sentiment. And Monica also has come into in the chat box. The best as teachers is that we notice a gap in the materials we use in the classroom. It is actually a change for us as LATAs to produce this. So this is a chance for us to produce relevant materials. Thank you, Monica, for that comment. Do we have anyone who wants to say something as we go towards the end of this particular engagement? Okay. So thank you. Oh, there is Varoda. Is this a hand from the earlier time you spoke? I think she has taken it down. Okay. There's one hand from Vice President. Probably after he has spoken, we can close this time.
Thank you, President. Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, this was a deliberately a brilliant idea to speak on this subject, because it's a subject that helps us to attach importance to material that we have in schools. Yeah, for example, whenever we have material in school, especially for us language teachers, we should take time to make sure that before the school accepts the material, we evaluate it. And in the evaluation criteria, we need to check the language that is used. Is it appropriate to the grade level, like the president mentioned? What about the illustrations, for example? Are the illustrations real? Are they clear? Are they also simple? We look at those things. If we check through the material, we may inform even the administrators. So before we spend money on any material that come in school. We'll be able to give information, adequate information to our administrators to say, fine, I think this material is okay, especially that is if it's not a donated material from well wishers. If they just want to purchase from some sources, let's take advantage of that time to make sure that the material is properly evaluated. We give it a best evaluation that we can. And then on another level of adaptation, I'm sure we have a number of books that are in school. Most of our schools received some books. We have different types and kinds. So probably we can look for material or information from those reference sources. The best we can to make the material real to a learner, we need to adapt to the level of a learner, the material that we pick or the passage or anything that we pick, and even try to adapt the use of names. For example, we may not wish to use sport activity that we do not have here, for example, or names that are very foreign to our learner. So we can adapt that information, that material. We adapt the passage maybe from a text, make it, let the passage speak to the learner, what is current to the learner and also on the soil. That helps a learner to learn with keen interest, other than using foreign names, foreign sport activities, for anything, everything foreign. Even if we have picked it from somewhere, that gives a challenge to our learners to learn better. So as teachers of language, we try our level best to adapt the material to the level of a learner, the local situations, so that learners learn best. And also they find themselves, they should see themselves in the lesson. The lesson should not be so much, alien to them. Yeah, so it must be very real, and it should be familiar to their environment. That way, then we'll be handling even our language. It will appeal to the learner, the one that is intended to learn. Otherwise, this is a very important information that the president has presented. Let's take interest in reviewing this material so that we begin to use some of the features that he has touched. Thank you very much, President and Mr. Moon.
Thank you so much, Vip. I think as we go forward, we will start, we'll have some sessions that are targeting material production areas, like how do you produce materials for speaking, how do you produce materials for writing, and materials for reading, and so on, so that we have a broader understanding into these specific materials. I think as the committee, the committee on materials production from the SIG prepares a roadmap. I think they should also work around just brief presentations on how to do. They can bring in experts how to produce materials for various language aspects, so that even as people decide to make contributions, they will be really targeting those areas and to produce quality materials. Thank you so much for participating in today's webinar. I think our next one should be on assessment, after which we will go on a break and resume after the exams.
We wish to thank everyone for the participation. Please, when a pop-up of the evaluation of the webinar comes through, it's easier to give it the best evaluation and or the best criticism. Then an email will be sent where one is able to let's simply give that. Thank you.